let's have a look at some of the criticisms of the budget, because obviously you want to talk about the high-vis opportunities, but let's start with furlough. Now, furlough has been extended until September, end of September, October. But I thought that all of the restrictions were supposed to be over on June the 21st. And people might be concerned there is something you know that we don't. It's good to have support, but are you concerned there are still going to be restrictions in place for a few months after June?
Well, Susanna, the approach we took with all of our support yesterday was first and foremost to make good on the promise that we made a year ago, which is to do whatever it takes to support people, families, businesses through the crisis. And the budget set out that yesterday. Furlough extension was a part of that. You're right, to the end of September. And we did that for a couple of reasons. I wanted people to have the reassurance that we were going long beyond the end of the roadmap, because of course things might change. We wanted to accommodate even the most cautious view of exiting from the restrictions. Now, hopefully that won't happen, and we're making great progress, and thanks to everyone involved in the vaccination drive for making that possible. But it's also important to remember that just because the restrictions end, businesses will still need to take time to recover. Things will take a bit of time to get back to the way they were.
So you don't expect decisions to be made about
that extra cushion.
Okay, so you talk about cautious, and you hope that restrictions will end on the 21st of June, but you don't think that is going to be the point where businesses decide on jobs?
Well, no, it's more the function of it won't be that the economy snaps back completely to as it was overnight. Businesses are still recovering. Many of them have been closed for many months. It takes time for them to rebuild the strength that they had. And that's why the furlough extension is just one part of it. But also, there's lots of other things that will provide support to businesses through the year. For example, cuts and discounts to their business rates bill. We're giving them cash grants.
Sorry, I just want
to
stay on the furlough deadline for just the time being. So you're hopeful that restrictions will end on June 21st, but furlough continues until the end of September. However, you have only extended the £20 a week universal credit uplift for another few months. You haven't extended it in perpetuity. There is a danger, isn't it, that just at the point that businesses decide that they aren't going to have furlough anymore and they can't support their workers anymore, and people start to lose their jobs, that they will no longer be entitled to that universal credit support either. There is going to be a pinch point, isn't there, in the autumn for people financially?
Well, actually, if you look at all the different things we're doing, they all happen at different times throughout the year. The universal credit uplift has been extended in full for 6 months. That's well beyond the end of this national lockdown. Remember, it was put in place temporarily last year when we entered the national lockdown. Obviously, we've had restrictions for longer than we would have liked, but the national lockdown will end and the universal credit uplift will continue well beyond that through to September as well. But it's important also to remember that's just one of the things we're doing to help those who are in low incomes over the course of this next year and beyond. The national living wage.
Right, if you acknowledge, no, sorry, I just want to finish this point about universal credit. If you acknowledge that people need that £20 a week uplift, and if you acknowledge that furlough is going to end at the end of September, and inevitably some people are going to lose their jobs at that point, why couldn't you extend that benefit for longer? I mean, why would suddenly people not need that £20 a week extra?
Well, that was put in place when we were in a national lockdown. Obviously, that's gone on for longer than we've liked. We are going to exit this national lockdown in the coming weeks, and the universal credit uplift will be in place well beyond the end of that. But what I was saying is that's just one of the things we're doing to support low-income families. The national living wage is being increased above inflation starting in April. That's a £350 pay rise to those who are full-time on the national living wage. Also, we're providing a lot of support for those vulnerable families who need help with their rent payments through something called local housing allowance. That's £1 billion of extra investment next year. It will help 1.5 million families, about £600 each. We're also providing 3.5 million families with 150 quid to help with their council tax bills. And what is really important, as the economy reopens, that we focus our attention on giving people the opportunity to get new jobs and to get better jobs. So our apprenticeship incentives, the lifetime skills guarantee, and the Kickstart scheme, all of those are billions of pounds of investment to help people get the skills they need, get good jobs, and that is the right way to focus our support as the economy reopens.
So they're people that are looking for new jobs and better jobs. What about people that have had jobs that are self-employed but haven't been able to be supported by the schemes that you've had in place during the pandemic and continue not to be supported? Of course, I'm talking about the excluded. I know you're very aware of the situation with the excluded and their continuing battle, Chancellor, to try and get some traction with you, to try and see you. The last time you were on with us, you claimed that you had spoken to them. They dispute that. They say they still haven't had face-to-face talks with you. And there's currently 3.8 million taxpayers that are in this situation, that are really, really struggling. Let's just have a listen to what Rachel Flower, who's the co-founder of Excluded, has been saying about the budget to LBC.
These are people who are in viable jobs or running fantastic businesses in March and have been now pushed into significant debt. Many have lost their homes or been evicted. They can't meet their mortgage payments, can't put food on the table for their children. The mental health implications are just absolutely massive. We have lost people from our community who just felt they had no choice. They couldn't carry on due to the despairing situation they've been plunged into.
Do you appreciate and understand that there are huge numbers of people, through no fault of their own, that are slipping through the gaps here?
Well, that's why yesterday I was pleased that we could announce a major improvement in access to the self-employment scheme. You know, last year we didn't have the tax returns from people who were newly self-employed. Now that the tax return filing deadline has passed, we do have those returns, and that means over 600,000 more people are able to be brought into the system.
Let's talk about that figure, if we may, Chancellor.
And if you look at the...
Let's just talk about that figure, if we may, because of course...
No, I'm just about to, Ben.
OK, carry on.
Well, I think if you take a step back and look at the sum total of our support for the self-employed, over the course of this crisis, we're going to spend over £30 billion supporting those in self-employment. It will be, I think, it will stand as the most generous support for self-employment of any country anywhere in the world.
And if you can access that support, Chancellor, if you can access that support, that is an absolute godsend. But there are 3 million people that currently can't. That 600,000 figure that you've suggested, again, is disputed. Hold on, I'll let you finish. Let me just address this. Let me just address this. They claim, Excluded claim, that there's only 150,000, not the 600,000, because the money you get is based on profits that you've made. If you only started your business in 2019-20, you may not have made any profits at all. So how can you get a percentage of nothing?
Well, the whole point about the scheme is to provide income support to people who had profits, because that was their income. If they didn't have the income,
business hasn't created any profits yet,
for the taxpayer to,
then how can you get any support?
For the income. Well, because the scheme is designed to help people whose incomes have suffered as a result of the crisis. But if you didn't have income to start with, then obviously that removes the rationale for them needing support. But your 3 million figure, I just want to talk about that a little bit. Obviously, 600,000 of those will be brought into the system because they will be newly self-employed. That is the number of new tax returns we've got from people in that year for that last year. So that is actually the gross number of people. Now, they will go through the criteria, of course, like everybody else, but that's a big expansion. And if you look at the largest group of that people, 1.5 million out of that 3, those people are not majority self-employed. And when I met with all the representatives of those self-employment groups, which is what I said last time I was on your show, I think there was a bit of a miscommunication about that, but what I said is I met with all those groups at the beginning of this crisis to set up this scheme. All of them agreed with the principle that we should target taxpayer money on those who make the majority of their income from self-employment. And actually, many of those groups suggested a higher threshold of 60% or 2/3. And we went with something that was more generous. We said you just have to be majority self-employed to benefit from these generous cash grants. So that 1.5 million people who are not majority self-employed, the average self-employment income that they have is around £2,000 to £3,000. So at that level, lots of the other things we would have done would have helped them, and that was probably not the significant part of their earnings. hands, obviously, at that level. So I think it's reasonable to take the approach that we have, and in aggregate, it will stand as a very generous and comprehensive approach.
Could you commit, though, this morning, and as you say, you have met, and they have said you've met that all-party group for the self-employed, but the excluded, the forgotten, these are huge groups that have huge amount of support, over 3 million people. Would you commit to actually speaking to them specifically so they can outline the issues for you directly? Because one of the problems is they don't feel like they're being heard.
So my team and my ministerial colleague who's done this has met with these groups. They've met with them just very recently, in fact, and have gone through all the various suggestions. Now, again, I don't want to have a miscommunication. I think the Financial Secretary to the Treasury has met extensively with various different groups, and I haven't got the full list in front of me because then you'll say there's one group that he hasn't met, but we have engaged and met with all the groups that hear what the proposals that they've put forward, because we've wanted to find ways to make improvements where we can, and as a result of the conversations we've had with groups, we have been able to make that improvement yesterday that we announced, which is great news. It brings lots more people into the system. This remains a generous way to support people, and as I said, £30 billion of support over this crisis. Important to know, if you look at the projections outlined yesterday, it is forecast that we actually spend more money supporting those in self-employment than we do on the furlough scheme.
Okay.
And I think that should give you some sense of the scale and generosity of what we're doing.
The NHS and social care sectors are frustrated that you haven't put extra money their way, but you are shouting about, of course, the fact that you've backed in its billions the vaccination programme. Is a no jab, no entry policy for hospitality, for instance, perhaps even for employment, something that you would back in order to open up the economy?
So on your first point, Susanna, about NHS and spending, this is a budget which doesn't really set department spending budgets. We did that at the spending review, and the good news is the NHS is in the midst of a very generous 5-year settlement. We're ploughing lots of money extra into the NHS to get 50,000 more nurses, 40 more hospitals, and all the rest of it. So there's good investment going in the NHS day to day, not just with coronavirus. But on your very good question about what do we do with vaccination certificates or passports, as people have called them. It is a difficult and complicated question because it raises various practical, legal and ethical issues, and we are working through those. So the Prime Minister's got a committee, and we've got not just ethicists but doctors and business people working together to look at that particular question, to consider all the issues in the round, and then come up with some recommendations in a few months' time, and we can see if they can play a part in reopening parts of our economy.
Is it something you are minded to back? Because the fact that there is a committee on it...
It's too early to use that, yeah.
There's a committee on it trying to fix the problem.
It would be too early for me to use a phrase like minded to. No, it's a committee to examine the various issues that it throws up. And there's obvious challenges. Some people are not able, for health reasons, to get vaccinations. Other people, and then there's a practical aspect of it. How do we verify it? What kind of technology would one use? What circumstances would it be appropriate to use it? Now, so it's too early to say anyone's minded to do anything. That's quite a specific phrase. But I think it's right that we go through all of that, just surface what the issues and benefits might be, and then we can decide and make a decision in the round in the coming months.